It's 2 in the morning on the Mississippi River. A man is asleep on a deck packed shoulder to shoulder with other soldiers. He hasn't slept this deep in years. Not once. Not through the whole war. Not through prison camp. But tonight he finally let himself relax because for the first time in years, he actually believes he's safe. He believes the worst is behind him. He has about 90 seconds left to live. Somewhere in Arkansas today, there's a ship buried under a soybean field. Not a shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean, a full steamboat sitting 32 feet under dry farmland because a river changed its course 150 years ago and just left it behind. That ship killed more people than the Titanic. Not fewer, more. You know the Titanic. You've seen the movie. You know the names Jack and Rose even if you've never read a single history book in your life. But I'd bet almost nobody watching this has ever heard the word Sultana. And that's not because the story isn't horrifying enough. It's because of what happened 2 days before it, something so big, so devastating to the entire country, that this disaster got buried before it even had a chance to be remembered. 1,400 people, soldiers, men who had already survived the worst prison camps in American history, 2 or 3 days from walking back into their own homes. They didn't die in battle. They died on their way home. And the reason why is going to make you sick. Welcome back to the Ink Vault, April 1865. The Civil War is finally ending. Robert E. Lee has surrendered. The fighting that tore this country apart for 4 brutal years is winding down, and all across the South, something is starting to happen that hasn't happened in years. Union soldiers who were captured and locked away in Confederate prison camps are being released. If you don't know what those camps were like, you need to. Places like Andersonville in Georgia and Cahaba in Alabama weren't just prisons. They were death traps, overcrowded, filthy, barely any food, disease everywhere. Men went in healthy and came out looking like skeletons. Thousands never came out at all. So when word spreads through these camps that the war is over and they're finally being sent home, you can imagine what that feels like. These aren't just soldiers anymore. These are survivors, starved, sick, some of them barely able to walk, but alive. And every single one of them has one thing on their mind: home. The U.S. government needs to get thousands of these former prisoners back up north, and fast. So they start paying steamboat companies to ferry them up the Mississippi River. And that payment is where this whole story starts to rot from the inside. Because the government isn't just paying a flat fee, they're paying per soldier. $5 a head for enlisted men, $10 for officers. Which means if you're a steamboat captain in 1865, more soldiers on your boat means more money in your pocket. To understand how this happened, you have to look at a man named Captain J. Cass Mason. He runs the Sultana, a wooden steamboat that's been struggling for business. Mason needs money. Bad. So, when a quartermaster officer named Reuben Hatch, a man with a documented history of corruption, offers him a deal, "Give me a cut, and I'll make sure your boat gets loaded with every paroled soldier I can send your way." Mason doesn't hesitate. It's a handshake, a kickback, plain and simple bribery with desperate, starving soldiers as the currency. Now, the Sultana's legal capacity, how many people this boat was built and licensed to carry, was 376 people, passengers and crew combined. By the time she leaves port, she is carrying over 2,100 people. Think about that for a second. That's not double the limit, not even triple. The boat was packed nearly 6 times past what it was legally allowed to carry. Men packed onto every deck, every walkway, every inch of open space, so tightly that some of them can barely turn around. And most of them are men who just walked out of hellholes deep in the South. Bodies wrecked by starvation, some too weak to even stand for long, now crammed shoulder to shoulder on a boat that was never built to hold them. And that's before we even get to the boiler. A few days before all this happens, the Sultana develops a problem. One of her boilers is leaking. This isn't a small issue. A steamboat's boilers are essentially controlled explosions, heating water into steam to power the engine. A leak means the metal is weakening. It means there's a real risk of catastrophic failure. The proper fix takes time, days maybe. Time Mason doesn't have, because that government contract, that per-soldier payday, is sitting right there waiting for him in Vicksburg. So instead of the full repair, the engineer does something faster, a patch job, a quick fix, just enough to hold things together for one more trip. Mason knows the risk. The engineer knows the risk, but there's money on the table, and there's a boat full of soldiers waiting to go home, and nobody wants to be the person who says, wait. So the Sultana loads up, 6 times over capacity, running on a boiler that was never properly fixed, and pushes off from Vicksburg, heading north up the Mississippi toward home. April 27th, 1865, just north of Memphis, Tennessee. This is the moment we opened with. Most of the men on board are asleep, packed together on every surface of the boat, exhausted from years of war and captivity, finally letting themselves rest because, for the first time in years, they actually believe they're safe. And then the boiler explodes. Not 1. 3 of the 4 boilers detonate almost simultaneously, tearing through the center of the ship in a blast so massive it's later described as lifting the entire vessel out of the water. Scalding steam rips through the crowd. Wood splinters into shrapnel. Men who survived combat, who survived starvation and disease in southern prison camps, who survived years of the worst things a war can do to a human being, are killed instantly in their sleep on a boat that was supposed to be taking them home. An estimated 400 people die in the explosion itself, and then the fire starts. The Sultana was a wooden boat. Within minutes, she is burning from the inside out, flames climbing through the decks, cutting off escape routes, forcing hundreds of men who survived the blast to make an impossible choice: burn or jump into the Mississippi River in the middle of the night. Imagine being in that water. It's 2 in the morning, pitch black, and the current is freezing cold from the spring runoff. And into that water go hundreds of men, many of them so weakened by years of starvation in prison camps that they can barely swim, if they can swim at all. Survivors later described the river being so full of desperate people that some of them pulled each other under without meaning to, just grabbing onto anything that might keep them afloat. Men clung to floating debris, to pieces of the wrecked boat, to tree branches along the shore. Some made it to trees still standing in the flooded banks and hung there for hours until rescue came. And here's a detail that still gets me every time I read it. Confederate soldiers, men who, weeks earlier, would have been shooting at these exact same Union prisoners, waded into that freezing water to help pull survivors out. The war was over. In that moment, in that river, there was no blue and no gray, just people trying to save other people. By the time the sun comes up, close to 900 people have been pulled from the water alive. But the official death toll, and historians still debate the exact number to this day, lands somewhere between 1,100 and 1,800 people. The Titanic killed around 1,500. The Sultana disaster happened in the middle of the night, on a river most Americans couldn't find on a map, and by the numbers, it was worse. So why haven't you heard of this? Here's the answer, and it's almost as unsettling as the disaster itself. 2 days before the Sultana exploded, President Abraham Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was tracked down and killed on a farm in Virginia. The entire country, every newspaper, every telegraph line, every conversation happening anywhere in America, was consumed by that story. The president was dead. His killer was dead. The nation was still in shock. And then, in the middle of all of that, over 1,000 soldiers die on a boat almost nobody in the North had heard of, in a disaster that happened at 2 in the morning, far from any major city. The story simply couldn't compete. It got a few lines in the newspapers and then it was gone, swallowed by a bigger tragedy that the entire country was already grieving. No parades, no national mourning, no monument built for decades. Just families back home who never got the telegram they were hoping for, and instead got a different one entirely. You'd think after something like this, someone would answer for it. Someone would go to prison. Someone would at least lose their career. Captain Mason didn't have to answer for anything. He died in the explosion, along with most of his crew. But Reuben Hatch, the officer who took the bribe and that helped overload that boat in the first place, he was investigated and exonerated. Political connections did what they always seem to do. No one was ever formally held responsible for the worst maritime disaster in American history. Over 1,000 people dead, many of them men who had already survived the very worst that this war could throw at them, and the official record closes with nobody's name attached to the blame. For over a century, the wreck of the Sultana just disappeared. Not because it sank into the deep, the Mississippi River is not that deep, but because rivers move. Over the decades, the Mississippi shifted its course, the way it's done for thousands of years, and the spot where the Sultana went down slowly became dry land. In 1982, a Memphis lawyer named Jerry Potter, who had spent years obsessed with this story, finally located the wreckage. Not underwater. Under a soybean field in Arkansas, buried 32 feet beneath the soil that farmers had been planting crops in for generations, with absolutely no idea what was resting beneath their boots. To this day, that's where most of the Sultana remains. Not raised, not in a museum, still down there, under the dirt, largely forgotten by the country it was trying to bring its soldiers home to. Here's what stays with me about this story. These men didn't die charging into gunfire. They didn't die in the mud of some battlefield with their names carved into a monument somewhere. They survived years of war. They survived Andersonville. They survived Cahaba. They survived the exact things this country asked them to survive. And then greed, a bribe, a shortcut, a patched-up boiler that should have been properly fixed, took them in their sleep, feet away from freedom, on a boat that was never supposed to carry that many people in the first place. No one was punished. The story was buried by bigger news, and the wreck itself is literally buried under a field in a state most people will never visit. So I'll leave you with this question, and I actually want you to answer it down in the comments. If you had just survived years in a prison camp like Andersonville, starved, broken, desperate to get home, and you saw that overcrowded boat waiting for you at the dock, would you have gotten on anyway? Would you have had a choice? Let me know. I read every single comment. Follow the Ink Vault. We go where others don't.